how do you see, because multiple states as well, so how do you see that these states have evolved themselves in the transformative journey of being pre and post NDIS?
Sure. I mean,
How do you see? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, although I started in disability 30 years ago, I haven't stayed in the sector for the whole 30
Okay.
years. So for me, it's a case of returning to the sector after quite a long time away from it. When I first started working in the sector, people with disabilities didn't get the same choice over providers. Essentially, they went to government. Government would allocate them to a provider. And while they certainly had rights to complain and so on, they would have to essentially make a complaint in order to change providers. Whereas these days, as with any of us in many markets, the people we serve can freely choose to take their business and their plans to another provider. That is the biggest and most obvious difference between the disability sector now and the disability sector when I started. I have to say that change is not yet kind of complete. There is more choice in some parts of the disability and the NDIS market than there is in others. And the group homes that we discussed before is an example of where true choice for those tenants is going to require a few things to be put in place, including adequate funding in their plans, supports for decision making, alternative accommodation being suitable and accessible, for example. So a few things need to be put in place, I think, for them to get the same kind of choice that a family in metropolitan Melbourne might have, for example, over physiotherapy or other things, where I think there are more providers and more choice and hopefully a bit more information for families to use in exercising that choice.
And you would see that there is so much happening right now in terms of the changes coming. We've been talking about Royal Commission report due and the NDIS review. So how is Urala preparing itself for the changes, and then what the changes you think are coming around?
Yeah. Urala's had possibly the longest of any provider to think about the Royal Commission, because we were, I think, the first witness of the Royal Commission from a provider point of view, testifying, unfortunately, about cases of abuse and crimes that have been committed by our staff, and which had contributed to the Royal Commission being established. So that was at our first hearing over 3 years ago, and we've had the time both before that hearing and since that hearing to reflect on what we might do to prepare for some of the changes coming out of the Royal Commission. I have no doubt the Royal Commission will make strong recommendations about protecting the universal human rights of people with disability, about work that providers have to do to prevent abuse, but also what providers like Urala need to do when abuse has actually occurred, and we're aware of it. And we've put some work into that. I spoke to the Royal Commission as a witness earlier this year, and I outlined for the Royal Commission what we've done, for example, about setting up access to redress for victims of abuse. I will welcome recommendations from the Royal Commission about a national redress scheme, as exists, for example, for victims of institutional child sexual abuse already. But ahead of any of those recommendations, we don't think we need to wait. We think there are things we can do to ensure, for example, access to independent legal advice, access to counselling and therapy, and access to funding, if that contributes to people's journey of recovery after abuse. So we've put principles in place. We've worked with people with disabilities on our board and through advocacy organisations to design access to redress. That's an example of where I think we're trying to anticipate where the Royal Commission will go, but we'll wait for the recommendations to then build off what we've done and do better.
Lovely.